kids to snag one of these books, but they're back there in kids ministry. But we want to give a gift to everybody here at ID, help us advance some of our values. This book does a fantastic job. It's a children's book, but it really highlights several of the key core values that we have here at ID. One being the gospel as central to our lives. A second being the church as central to God's plan. And the third, diversity in the church, cultural diversity, being one of the key components to why God created the nations. What God is doing in Jesus. And so this book really highlights the problems of sin and the solutions of redemption and how the gospel of Jesus brings all people from all nations together in one family because we have one Father. So if you have dropped off kids into kids ministry and you have not gotten one of these books yet, go ahead and ask them for that. And they will be surprised because I forgot to tell them that I was going to let you all know you could go back and do that. But they're there, and at least what's left. So grab them while they're still here. Several years ago, I forget how long, but Christy and I bought our first house, and it was a major fixer-upper, which ignorantly we thought would be fun. When you are young and naive, you think that these big projects are going to be great. And the idea of a fixer-upper is great. Like, you can dream about what you're going to create in this space. You think about, it's going to be hard work, but we're going to put some sweat equity into this thing, and we're going to make it our own, and it's going to turn out to be beautiful, and we'll even invest in this and might make some money off of it. But living in a construction site isn't... It is a nightmare when you have entire sections of your house blocked off at a time, and it's this project that is taunting you. You go to work and I'm not done yet. You gonna watch TV? And it is just not on this. The opinions on what's happening here in Jonah 2 are across the map. Some people think that Jonah 1:17 through 2:10 does not belong in this book at all. Like if you just take Jonah 2 out of its context, it doesn't seem like it fits. It doesn't. Jonah is thrown, God casts Jonah into the deep. He's in this watery grave. The bars have been closed over his head forever. And if you read it, he never says he's sorry, right? Like when Tony was reading that, if you could get past how smooth his voice is, did you hear Jonah say, I'm sorry? Did you hear him ever say, Lord, against you and you only have I sinned? No, it's just not there. Jonah 2 reads like most of the Psalms. Like he's being attacked unfairly, and yet he's still relying on God, and God is sustaining him in amazing circumstances, in amazing ways. But Jonah never says he's done anything wrong, but if you read Jonah 1, he's done some wrong things, hasn't he? And so some people will say, no, this can't be. This doesn't fit. This does not fit the story. It does not fit the context. And so if we just take Jonah 1:17 and chapter 2, we just remove that from the book, well, then the book makes some more sense, and we don't have to deal with this troublesome issue of a man getting swallowed alive by a fish and living. So let's just cut that out. I don't think we should do that. Many other scholars, I'm not a scholar, but the scholars think we should leave this chapter in the book. And those folks, they look at this in completely different ways. It's amazing. Some people think that Jonah 2 is like a textbook case of what false repentance looks like. Jonah's just walking through the motions of these religious forms that he's learned over the years. He never apologizes. He never says he's done anything wrong. He may be charging God with doing some wrong things because it said that God threw him into the deep. He calls out idol worshipers, said that those who worship idols, they forsake steadfast love, but clearly not Jonah. Jonah hasn't done anything wrong. And so some folks will say this is a textbook case of Jonah acting out in false repentance. This is what false superficial repentance looks like. It's religious forms. It's using these words and this language and this pattern of prayer that like you've just come to know because you've grown up in church or something. But it's not actually in you. Others, though, believe that this is the evidence of a transformed man. That Jonah was running from God, but now he's running to God. He was trying to flee from the presence of the Lord, but now he's praying to God. Further, when he gets out of the fish, he goes immediately to Nineveh and does what God said. So what's happening here? Is Jonah, is this full repentance or false repentance? What is going on? Well, I would argue that it's neither, and it's both, and it's happening at the same time. I think Jonah is in this place that we don't like to be, and we don't want to let other people sit in either. We don't like the idea that somebody can be not all good or not all bad, right? We have our stories and they're filled with good guys and bad guys. We want people to either be broken or fixed, but we don't want people to be kind of getting fixed a little bit at a time, right? We don't like to be there. We don't like to let other people be there, but I'm convinced this is where Jonah's at. Look at 2:1. Jonah does turn to God. He turns to God. He's praying to God. He is praying. That's a huge win, isn't it? Jonah's like, I don't care what else has happened in this man's life, what he's gone through, what he has done. He's praying. That's a huge win. But there's no repentance. He's turning to God, but not yet from his sin. He's in between. He's in between running and repenting. Notice, too, that Jonah wants to be in God's presence. 2 times in these 10 verses, Jonah talks about being, he references God's temple in one way or another. In verses 4 and verse 7, he talks about wanting to be in God's temple. Now, that's not a reference to heaven. In Jonah's mindset, he's talking about the temple that's in Jerusalem. And in the way that God set this up in the Old Covenant was that the temple in Jerusalem would be the tangible presence of God on the earth. It was where heaven met earth. It was where God lived. It was a house of prayer for the nations. It was where people went to encounter God. The temple was where the presence of God tangibly, physically, literally, spiritually dwelt. And so when Jonah talks about going to the temple, and he talks about his prayer entering the temple, he's not thinking about heaven out there somewhere. He's thinking about God's presence in Jerusalem. And now, the ancient Jews, this is their trajectory, their thought ran down, and the New Testament continues this track too, because it's not the idea that they didn't have this idea that heaven is out there somewhere, and when we die, God will take us there. That wasn't the way that they believed. They believed, and the New Testament continues, and you see this even in Revelation 21, not that one day when we die we'll go to heaven, but rather one day God will bring heaven to us.